My name's Adam. I'm the pastor here. We are closing out a series called How to Human, where we've been looking at human interactions, and I'm a little sad to see it go. It's one of those series that's been important. If you don't, live under a rock or up in the forest by yourself, we need to learn how to interact with each other. So I've really enjoyed it. Hope you have too. I want to start this morning by nerding out a little bit. So follow me on my nerd journey. Have you ever heard of the element radium? Radium. So it's a shiny metallic silvery element discovered by Marie Curie in 1898. I'm sure you care about that. That'll be on the test later. Please remember that. That is around the same time that they discovered X-rays and around the same time that they discovered that radiation shrinks tumors, okay? So it's a very interesting time in scientific history where all this stuff is happening. Now, what you need to know about radium is that radium is a radioactive element. It's a radioactive element. Now, immediately you think, when you hear radioactive, you think, well, that's not good, right? You don't want to be around that. But back then, they didn't know much about radioactivity and radiation and stuff. All they knew, and think about this, like the conclusions we would come to as a society, all they knew is that, hey, X-rays are cool, super helpful, like helps us be able to see broken bones and all that stuff, and radiation shrinks tumors. If that's all you knew, wouldn't you be like, man, I wonder what other good things radiation can do for us? So that's kind of where we were at as a society. They assumed radiation was like good for you. So what happened was society in general, and then really like all these manufacturers got really excited about radium and this radioactivity, and they started including it in consumer products. They started putting literal radioactive material inside of consumer products. And I just wanted to read some of these to you just because I think they're hilarious to look back on in some of their slogans. So there was a radioactive toothpaste, and their slogan was, "Your teeth will shine with radioactive brilliance." And I'm not making up. It sounds like it's out of the game Fallout, but that's actually a real, actual slogan. And if you were in the dark and you smiled, you could actually see your teeth because they were glowing, which is crazy that they wanted that. They had these things called revigorator pots, which were lined with radium paint, and you would put water in them to sit overnight, and then in the morning you would drink the radioactive water. It was supposed to give you energy. It was like 1900 Gatorade that will eventually kill you. Something called a clean tobacco card. It was the size of a playing card, treated literally radioactive, that you would put in with your cigarettes, and it was advertised to reduce tar and nicotine in your cigarettes. And you thought cigarettes were bad. No, how about radioactive cigarettes? That's even worse. There was a German chocolate bar that had radium in it that was supposed to make people look younger. Wish that were actually real. That would be cool. Radithor radioactive bottled water, and they claimed it could cure arthritis, mental illness, stomach cancer, which is kind of ironic, and impotence. I don't know about that. I'll just leave it alone. We'll leave it alone. There's hand cleaner. This is my favorite slogan. Slogan for hand cleaner was, takes everything off but the skin. Just, comma, and a little bit of the skin too. Just a little. Top layer. You'll be fine. And then the craziest thing I think is it was this atomic lab for kids. And it was like a little briefcase thing that opened up, and it actually literally had radioactive material in the lab, and they could play with it, and they learned about atomic power and all that stuff. And these kids were actually playing with real radioactive material. Took us a couple of decades to realize some of the mistakes that were made there. But radiation is an interesting thing, isn't it? I find it fascinating that our first interactions with radiation were actually positive. That our society, our culture looked at that and said, ooh, look at the good this can do. Because it is radiation, atomic power, all that stuff. It's just powerful, right? And there's a lot of good that can come from it. Yeah, you can do x-rays, man. We can see broken bones. You can see through things, right? And it does shrink cancer cells. Like that's just, some of you've experienced this, either you or your family members, and that's important to you. Like that's life-giving stuff there. And if you look at the power of the atom, you can power a power grid, you can power a submarine. There's lots of good that can come from that power. But we also know there's a lot of bad, right? Radiation causes cancer as well. It causes sickness. The power of the atom, you can make a really big bomb out of that too. So it's powerful, but it's like a neutral power, right? It can be used for good or it can be used for evil. And that has me thinking about something that you have in your life. You have that kind of a power, spiritually speaking, in your life. It's just powerful. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. But it is powerful no matter how you look at it. Mentioned in Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Your words have immense power, and much like radiation, that power can be used for good if thoughtfully and carefully used, but that power can be used for evil if you're careless, if you're thoughtless with your words. Your words have power. So I want to talk about words today. I want to talk about what comes out of your mouth, and I want to talk about a specific aspect of your words. I want to talk about gossip this morning. And I know, like when you woke up this morning, you're like, oh, what are we going to talk about at church? I hope it's gossip. I really want to hear a sermon. I know you were excited to hear this today. Just kidding. I know you don't want to, but sometimes it's the ones we don't want to hear that are actually really important. So here's what I want to do to start. I'm going to ask you to do something that's kind of crazy. You probably don't hear pastors say very often, but I want you to mentally set the Bible to the side for a minute. Okay? Mentally. If you're a Christian, I just need you to set the Bible aside because I want to ask you a question, but I want to ask you a question without the Bible for just a minute. We'll bring it back in, but I want to ask you this, okay? You ready? Okay, Bible aside. Did you do it? Okay. Liar. Is gossip wrong? I told you, leave it out. Stop it, Christian. Just leave it out for a minute. Is it wrong? Okay, since you can't detach from that, since you're so holy and so good that you can't detach yourself from your Bible for a minute, all right, let's ask it this way. Let's imagine that you would walk down the street and ask a bunch of people who aren't Christians this question. Is gossip wrong? What kind of answers do you think you'd get? Just random people who aren't Christians, who don't use the Bible as their, moral compass, and you ask them, is gossip wrong? What do you think you'd get? See, my guess is you'd get like mixed results. You'd get some people leaning one way and some people leaning another way. And I think there's two reasons for that. One, think about how crazy it is when you think about gossip, how far apart the two feelings are. The feeling you get when you're a part of gossip, as in you're the one giving or receiving gossip, versus the feeling you get when you find out that you've been gossiped about. Isn't it crazy that those two feelings are so far apart that, let's be honest, the one where you're a part of it, it feels good to be in, to be gossiped to or to be the one sharing that story. Like, that feels good. But then way over here when you feel, oh my gosh, they were saying what about me? Like, wow, oh man, I wasn't even in the room and I was getting torn down like that. Like, those two feelings are polar opposite, right? So when you ask somebody, is gossip wrong? Kind of depends on what their most recent interaction was with it, right? If they were in the feel-good side, maybe they might not be as harsh against it, but if they had just experienced like, oh yeah, I just had this happen to me, they might give a different answer. And let's be honest, most of us in our life, we probably experience the good feeling of gossiping more than we experience the feeling of finding out that we've been gossiped about. Wouldn't you say that's probably fair? Yeah, there's a tell, right? I just revealed something there. That you probably experience gossiping more than you experience finding out that you've been gossiped about. I'm not saying that you're gossiped about less. Maybe you are gossiped about a lot. But I'm just saying you probably don't find out about it. So you experience the good feeling more than you experience the bad one. And then I would also say, remember, the Bible's aside right now, so any sound bites that get taken are completely unfair because we set it aside for a minute. We're going to bring it back here. I would also say there's a lot of people who would say, well, if the person never finds out that they were gossiped about, then it's almost like a victimless crime, right? They might have that kind of an attitude towards it. So that's the first reason you might get some mixed results, is because the feelings of gossip are so far apart depending on which role you're playing. And then the second reason you might get mixed results asking, is gossip wrong, is because it's hard to define. Gossip is incredibly hard to define. I mean, how would you define it? If I said, hey, what's gossip? What would you say? Most of us, if you're just giving like an off-the-cuff answer and you're not like Googling it, you'd just say, oh, talking about somebody behind their back, right? Like that's gossip. But is it? What if I told you, hey, Sally just had her baby? Did you hear? Is that gossip? Well, it's not, unless Sally didn't want you to know she had her baby, and then I would wonder what you did to Sally to make her not want you to know that she had her baby, right? That's not. Is it? So it depends on your definition, right? Well, what about if you're a supervisor or a business owner and you have to have a conversation about an employee that's not in the room because you need to know their performance, and that's part of the review process? Like, is that gossip? They're not there and you're evaluating things. What if I said the sentence, hey, Jim and Janet are really going through it. You need to pray for them. Is that gossip? Christian? Is that? See, it's not so easy to define. We say, oh, talking about somebody behind their back, but I'm not sure that that's the best definition. And if we can be real, I don't know if you want to be real right now, but I'll be real. We tend to give ourselves a pass when it comes to gossip, don't we? I would say this is true of people who are Christians and people who aren't Christians. You're probably really good at not defining whatever you're currently doing as gossip. You're probably really good at explaining it away, at giving reasons for it, that this doesn't qualify as that. This is something else. So my guess is, this is my guess, if you did take that little poll and you're asking a bunch of people who aren't using the Bible as their moral compass, that you're just going down the street asking about gossip, my guess is generally what you would get is a lot of people talking about gossip kind of like the way we would talk about eating too much chocolate. You know, oh, it's a guilty pleasure. I know I shouldn't have done it, but it just felt so good. And that's kind of the way I think most people view gossip. It's a guilty pleasure. We know there's something off about it, but we enjoy it way too much to stop. So, if that's where most people would be, you know, outside of Christianity, I just kind of want to ask you where you would be even if you are a Christian, even if you do use the Bible as your, worldview builder, your moral compass. Let's be real. Because you know the right answer. If you're a Christian, you know the right answer, how you're supposed to think about gossip. But how do you really treat it in your life? I think a lot of Christians treat it the same way. They kind of treat it like the guilty pleasure thing. Like, I know I'm not supposed to, but I do it anyways. So what I want to do is I kind of want to explore what God says about it. So we're gonna bring the Bible back in here, and we're going to look at what God says about gossip. So I want to just ask some questions of this subject. The first question I want to ask is maybe a surprising one. I want to ask why it feels good to gossip. I don't know if I've ever heard somebody ask that question before. Well, like a pastor. Because by saying that, I'm admitting that it does. So I'm assuming that. Now, you might be like, I don't think that's true. Okay, well, the Bible says it. So in Proverbs 18:8, it says this: the words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body. Doesn't that sound like chocolate? That's like what I feel like that's what he's talking. I don't think chocolate was around back then, but that's what it sounds like. Saying that, hey, the words of a whisper, that by the way, whisper is one of the words the Bible uses to describe gossip all the time. And he's saying, hey, there's something about it. There's something that feels good. When somebody's telling you something about somebody else, or you're telling somebody something about somebody else, there's something that feels good about that. And by the way, science would agree with this. Scientists have looked at the brain when you're gossiping, and they discovered that two things happen. Oxytocin is released and dopamine is released. So what that means is that you feel good and you feel like a bond with the person that you're gossiping with. So something actually happens with the person that you're gossiping with. There's a connection there that happens. And that's interesting to me. So your brain is responding, quote unquote, positively to gossip, which is why it's tempting to do. So what does that mean? Your brain likes it. Something built in there. So one of my favorite theologians, C.S. Lewis, he talked about this idea that Satan has never invented a pleasure. So anything that's good inherently comes from God. Those are God's things. Anything that's good, anything that is positive in the world is actually a God thing. All Satan can do, he can't invent a pleasure that is inherently evil. All Satan does is take things that are good and twist them. Take something that's good and put it in a place that God did not intend. Take something that's good and have us try to get it in a way that God did not want us to. That's Satan's main play. So Lewis said the devil's formula is an ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure. So if you have anything like that in your life, where you feel like your craving is going up but the pleasure is diminishing, that's not a God thing. That's a good way to tell that something's not from God, is my cravings are going up but my pleasure is decreasing. What is going on here? That's not a God thing. So when it comes to gossip, one of the things you're getting is human connection. That's a good thing. That's a God thing. God wants us to have connection. God wants us to live in community. He wants you to feel these bonding moments with the people in your life. That's a good thing, gotten in a way that is not pleasing to God. And I would also say just the general feeling better about yourself. Again, let's be real. When you're gossiping about somebody, you're tearing them down, and usually you feel a little bit better afterwards, right? Kind of like going to Walmart. You just feel better. You feel better afterwards about yourself, right? Why are you not laughing at that? What is wrong with you? You're like nervous now because we're talking about gossip. You're not sure if you're allowed to laugh about that? This is weird, isn't it? Okay, so there's nothing wrong. That I think God wants you to feel good about yourself a lot. I don't think he wants you to hate yourself, right? But getting it by tearing someone else down, elevating self by tearing someone else down, that's getting it in a way that is not pleasing to God. So gossip does give you something, a good thing, but it's gotten in a warped and corrupt way. The reason I wanted to tell you that is because I think a lot of times Christians just aren't honest about really sin in general. When you talk about something that God doesn't want us to do, I think a lot of times pastors don't want to tell you that, hey, this is actually fun when you're doing it. I don't know, maybe they're afraid that like you'll do it and find out it's fun, but I think you will. So I'd rather be honest about it and say, hey, it feels nice to gossip sometimes. If you feel better about yourself, you feel connected to the other person, there's a good aspect to that. But God says, don't get that way. Don't get human connection by tearing down other human connection. Don't feel good about yourself by tearing other people down. That's a God thing. Now, what you need to know about the way God says to live is God sees the whole picture. So if we only look at gossip and say, well, my brain says it's good and I feel good, so why shouldn't I do it? God's telling you, hey, if you do that in that moment, there's going to be a consequence that you don't see. And that's always true of the way God tells us to live. See, because Satan's play is to show you the worm and hide the hook, right? Satan's play is to show you the pleasure but hide the cost that comes later. And Satan always wants to separate the pleasure from the cost. He wants you to not make the connection that the thing that you did that felt good, that God said not to do, is totally not attached to this consequence that's way over here. He doesn't want you to see that at all. And God's sitting here going, no, wait, I can see the whole picture. So when God says, don't do this or do this, he's saying, hey, here's an invitation to live in harmony with the way I created the world to work. So if you do this, it might feel nice in the moment, but it's going to screw up your life later. There's going to be a cost that you don't see, and it's not going to be worth it. So yes, there's some good. Yes, there's some good. But it's gotten in a way that's going to cost you. There's an unseen cost to it. One of the best analogies I've heard about gossip is that it's like peeing your pants. It feels good. Does anybody want to testify to that? There's a release to that, right? I mean, it's a long time for me, a long time ago that I experienced this, but it's a release and it's warm. But immediately, you regret it, right? Immediately there's a shame involved. Immediately there's an icky feeling. Isn't this kind of describe gossip a little bit? Like, yeah, I like it in the moment and it's warm, and then immediately I hate it and now it's cold and now it's not nice. Like, this is some of the images I want popping into your mind when you're thinking about gossip. What am I doing right now? Peeing my pants. I don't know why. I should stop. Like, that's what I want. That's what I want. So this first question, why does it feel good? Well, because there's some positive God things that you're getting in not a God way. That's why. And we as Christians, I just want to reiterate this. We don't decide right and wrong based on what feels good, right, Christians? We don't do that. we understand that there are some things that feel good in the moment that God still says not to do because he sees that there will be a cost later in our life that we don't want to pay, that we want to live our lives the way God says to live, because overall, that's better. That's better. So, first question, why does it feel good? Well, of course it does. So the second question I want to ask about gossip is, what is it? What is gossip? Now, have you ever heard, there's like this, I don't know if it's true or not, so, and I'm not trying to make fun of this too much. There's this thing I see sometimes on social media where people say like that in the Bible it says do not fear 365 times. Have you ever seen that? And people are like, see, it says do not fear for one time for every day of the year, something like that. You ever seen that? I don't know if it's true. Neither do you, because you've never counted either. So don't tell me you know, because no, unless you went through and counted, I just don't know if it's true or not. Sounds cool. I don't know. But I do know that there are, if you combine the verses with gossip with the verses about slander, which I would say is kind of the same thing, there's almost 300 verses about that. 300 times the Bible talks about this. And if you add it in, the like, be careful with your words kind of, you could probably get pretty close to almost one a day. That's how often the Bible talks about gossip and slander, which means this is really important. That's a lot of times for the Bible to talk about this. And it always talks about it in a negative way, that we shouldn't be doing these things. So coming up with a definition, a biblical definition, is a difficult thing because you got a lot of source material there. But if I told you, hey, lock yourself in a room, read every verse that talks about gossip or slander, write them all down, and then try to condense all of those verses down into like a single statement, a single definition, I think you'd come up with something similar to what I have here. I think this is kind of all of what the Bible says about gossip, boiled down as far as it could down into a single statement. So here it is. What is gossip? Sharing or accepting bad news about someone behind their back out of a bad heart. Now I know that's clunky, but it's trying to combine. Remember, there's 300 verses trying to be condensed down into one thing. And every part of this is important. So the first part is that it's shared. It's shared. Now, that means that you can be the giver or receiver, and you need to know that. I think sometimes we only think about gossip as being the tale bearer, but you can be the receiver of gossip as well, and the Bible doesn't want you to be either one. God doesn't want you to be either person in that. Now, it's easier, or maybe simpler, to say that you don't want to be the sharer of gossip, and maybe a little more difficult to not be the receiver, because sometimes it feels like you're just in the room when these things are happening. But it's really important to not be either one. You don't want to be either one. And it's shared, and it doesn't matter the method of sharing either. Conversations, phone call, text message, social media, a note tied to the leg of a pigeon. It does not matter how you got it, because I think always we're trying to find ways to make this not a thing. But if it's shared, I believe God kind of says it counts. And then it's specifically bad news. So you're sharing something negative about a person, something bad about a person. It can be in a fact, and it can be an opinion. It doesn't matter. It's got a negative slant to it. But I think one of the things we do most often, again, this is kind of a slippery one, is we may share a good thing, but we assign a bad reason to it, right? Oh, did you hear about Neil? Neil got a promotion. Oh, yeah, but Neil got the promotion because of this, and because of this, and because he does this, right? It was a good thing that you were sharing, but you're ascribing bad reasons to it. Or we ascribe negative motives to a good thing, right? Oh, the Joneses got a new house. You see that new house? Yeah, I don't know why they need that many square foot. What are they trying to say? Something, all being all pretentious and all that. So it's a good thing, but you're ascribing negative motives to it. Bad news, bad opinions. And I feel like I need to include this as well. Gossip it is also things that are true. Because I think one of the things that we say to tell ourselves that it's not gossip is we say, oh, well, it's true. This is actually, I'm not lying about it, as if gossip only counts if you're telling something that's not true. But that's not the way God defines it. God says, hey, if you're sharing something negative about somebody, even if it's true, that's out of bounds. That counts as gossip. So even if it's a true negative thing that you're telling about somebody, you're not supposed to be a tale bearer in that way. You don't need to be telling it. So don't. And then it also has this element of behind their back. The person isn't there. They're not there to explain. They're not there to defend. They're not there in that conversation. And this is really important to me too, because I think this part of the definition negates one of our most common defenses against gossip. And I've said it, and I bet you've said it too. It's this sentence, I'd say this even if they were here. You know, like there's your trump card, there's your get out of jail free card on the gossip. It doesn't count as gossip if I would say it if they were here. But listen, and I get it, good for you. You'd slander them right to their face, awesome. But what I think is important to understand is that they're not there. And they're not there. And if they were present, it would change the dynamic of the conversation. And that's important because they're not there and their voice isn't heard. And that's part of what makes it wrong, is because they don't have a voice. And you've taken that from them by having this conversation without them in the room. So it doesn't matter if you would say it to their face. You still shouldn't say it. And then there's this last part, this pesky last part of this definition. Out of a bad heart. I think this is the hardest one. Not because your heart's bad. Maybe it is toward the person. It's the easiest one to lie to yourself about. I think this is the easiest one to lie to yourself about. You ever heard that Christian cliche? It's kind of a Christian, like we say to each other, check your heart, check your heart. This is like one of the places where you really need to do that. Like, hey, check your heart, check your heart. Think about this. Have you ever examined yourself to the point that you really thought about your very, very first millisecond reaction to things? I always watch people, they're called micro expressions. You ever see people when somebody hears something, you watch their face and just something will flash across their face and it happens so fast sometimes you can miss it, but it'll usually tell you something and then it goes away and they put on the other face that's probably fake. And some people are really good at catching it fast. But have you ever thought about your very first initial reaction to hearing bad news about somebody? Before you catch yourself and say, that's not the kind of feeling I should have. The first knee-jerk feeling. Or the feeling you get when you're telling something negative about somebody. What happens to the edges of your mouth? Do they curl up a little bit as you're telling the story? Why? What's your heart like? Check your heart on those things. So there was this study done of soccer fans. They put a bunch of nodes all over soccer fans' faces to gauge reactions, and they would have them watch their favorite team play their rival, and they were measuring their negative and positive emotions as the game went on. And what they discovered was that the people in the study had a stronger and quicker positive reaction to something bad happening to their rival's team than they did to something good happening to their favorite team. So if their rival had a player get injured or they missed something, they would smile faster and have a more powerful emotional reaction to a negative thing than to a positive thing. And I thought that was an interesting thing to know about us as humans, that might be there inside of us. There's this German word that I maybe will be able to pronounce, Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude comes from two words. Schaden means damage. Freude means joy. Damage, joy. The strangely good feeling we get at the misfortune of others. That's a thing. The strangely good feeling we get tearing down other people. That's real. If you want to address gossip in your life, I think you're going to have to admit that this is present. The heart thing is a real thing. How you feel about other people's misfortune is a real thing. To use an English word, if you're not into the German thing, maybe we could just use the word smug. That when you hear something negative about somebody else, maybe you have a little bit of a smugness to you. That you put yourself here and you're just happy to see them down here. There's an elevating of self and a lowering of that person that happens inside of you. We do this to celebrities all the time. That's probably one of the main people and we don't even feel guilty about it at all. I read this article, this guy was talking about, he had heard this story about this, I think it was a famous actress who was living alone in her giant mansion, and she was talking about how lonely she felt in that big house. And he immediately was like, oh, so sorry to hear that in your giant mansion. Like he was like happy about hearing that she was sad. And he was like studying himself, like, how jacked up is that? Like, she's a human being. I mean, yeah, she's rich, yeah, whatever. But that's really kind of jacked up to immediately go to smug. You immediately were kind of smug about this. Oh, look at this rich person who's not happy. And you're happy that they're not happy. That's jacked up. Damage, joy. Check your heart. So the definition, sharing or accepting bad news about someone behind their back out of a bad heart. So there's a definition. I think that's pretty good. It's got a lot of meat on it. But I will caution you. I believe, even if you took this definition and you wrote it on a Post-it note, put it on your mirror in your bathroom, or put it on your dashboard, or made it the background to your phone, whatever you want to do to it, even if you memorize this, you are a good enough lawyer that you will be able to find your way around this definition if you want to. You will be able to redefine whatever you do as to be not that somehow. You will. You'll talk yourself out of, that's not really what I was doing here. So what I would suggest is that you take this definition to God and you ask God to help you apply it in your life. That you humbly accept God and the Holy Spirit guiding you in that to show you the ways you're using your words that actually should be defined as gossip, that you've been not defining as gossip, so that you don't have to feel guilty about it. That's the definition. All right, let's ask this question. Who does it hurt? Who does gossip hurt? Again, because I think some of the argument might be that, hey, it's a victimless crime. So I want to say the first person that hurts, I think is the most obvious one, is the person that's being gossiped about. The one that you're talking about, that person is the one who's hurt. If they walked in while you were saying this, or you accidentally butt dialed them right as you were gossiping about them, I think their feelings would be hurt. And by the way, I think that would be judgment of God upon you in your life. You would deserve that a little bit, wouldn't you? They would be hurt by that, right? You accidentally put somebody on speakerphone and listen to the things you're saying about them. That would hurt them. But I want to argue that even if they never find out that you were saying anything about them, that it harms them, that you're harming their person, that you're harming their reputation, you're harming the way people see them in their life, you're affecting something in the spiritual about them that you're not supposed to do. So it hurts the person being gossiped about. I also believe it hurts the listener, the person receiving the gossip, the person receiving the news, the listener. There's this verse in the book of Hebrews that I love the way it structures this. It's listen to this. It's in Hebrews 12:15. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. The idea that there's something negative inside here that's got a root to it, and when it gets fully grown, it'll grow up and out of your mouth, and it corrupts the people around. So there's something here with gossip, and when you share it, it now is on the other people. You're affecting them as well, and it hurts their ability now to love that person the way Jesus wants them to love them, and you did that. So it hurts them. And then finally, it hurts the one speaking, the sharer of the gossip. So many different ways. Let me give you a practical one. I think sometimes we get cause and effect mixed up in our life. Spiritual things especially. It seems like we get spiritual things messed up, cause and effect. So for example, hypothetical. This probably isn't you. But if you have somebody who you gossip about, like one person who you tend to gossip about a lot, you kind of have this person. Maybe you have a friend who this is the person who you guys talk about a lot. I know you wouldn't do that, but maybe other people would have that kind of a thing going on in life. And what your argument would be is that I just have so much negative feelings about this person that then I gossip about them. But I want to say, hold up, what if you've got cause and effect mixed up? And what if your negative feelings about this person actually are caused by, or at least fertilized by, your gossip. As in, it's not that you feel bad so you gossip, it's you gossip and then you feel bad or you feel worse because of the gossip. So I think it hurts your ability to love people like Jesus wants you to love them in your life. And here you are, you're probably praying, God, help me to love this person like you want me to love them. And God's like, okay, cool, well, shut up about him already then. Maybe if you'd stop gossiping about them, maybe then I could start to change some of the stuff that's going on inside your heart. But the more you share it, the worse this is going to get. And I also want to show you one of this, the 300 verses on gossip. And I wanted to pick the scariest one. It's almost Halloween. I figured we'd go scary. There was another one. It was close. But this one I think is pretty good. Psalm 101:5. This is God speaking. He says, whoever secretly slanders his neighbor, him I will destroy. No one who has a haughty look and an arrogant heart will I endure. Ooh. Man. And we talk about it like it's eating too much chocolate. Guilty pleasure. Does that sound like a guilty pleasure? No, God hates this. God hates gossip. God hates the heart that comes along with gossip. It hurts you. It hurts you because it hurts your ability to love people like Jesus, and it hurts your relationship with God as well. I don't want that verse. So one of the fascinating things about radiation, if you've ever looked at radiation is fascinating because if you put something that is radioactive next to something that is not radioactive, the thing that is not radioactive will become radioactive just because it's close to the thing that is radioactive. You're studied enough to know this, that it'll get on it and it'll like infect the thing that wasn't just by being close to the thing that was. So one of the most depressing stories that came out of this era where they were putting radium in everything is there was this company that was painting clock faces with radium paint that would glow. It literally glows in the dark. So they would paint it, and everything was hand painted back then. So they had these ladies who were painting these watch faces, these clock faces. And, there's no manufacturing, so they literally did everything by hand. And here's what the company told them. They said, hey, don't dip your brushes in water to get a good tip because you'll waste the radium paint. And we can't have the radium paint being wasted because it's super expensive. So you know what they told them to do to get a nice little tip on their brush with this radioactive paint? Just dab it on your tongue. Just dab it on your tongue and then paint. Just dab it on your tongue and then paint. Now, you can imagine what happened because of that. All of these ladies started getting horribly sick. And there ended up being a lawsuit. They actually sued the company because a lot of the higher-ups were actually protecting themselves from this paint. So there was some, they knew that at least at that point that there was some kind of danger there. Now it was a mess of a lawsuit. You can look it up. It's kind of fascinating if you're a nerd. They ended up winning the lawsuit. They won, I forget, it was like $10,000, which back then was a lot of money. But they won a certain amount of money, and they worded it for every year they're alive. It was almost like they knew, because one of the ladies didn't even make it out of the appeal process. She died, and then the rest of them died pretty quickly after the lawsuit. It was deadly. It was deadly. And I hesitate to even tell you the gruesomeness of the death. It attaches to the bones, this stuff, and it disintegrates. The one, they talk about the jaw and how the jaw just kind of comes off in the latter stages. It's awful, awful way to die. And I don't tell you that to depress you or to gross you out. I tell you that because that's what I want you to think about when you think about gossip. If I said something was radioactive in this room, you'd run, right? We get out because we can't see it. We don't realize it, but we know that it's deadly. And I kind of want you to have that feel about gossip. I want you to feel uncomfortable when it's in the room. I want you to want to get away from it like it's radioactive, because I do believe it is that deadly. There is life and death in the power of the tongue. It can do that kind of damage. Get away from it. Get away from it. Get away from it. So, $1 million question. How do we stop, right? You know the problem now. I hope you see the seriousness of the problem. How do we stop? Because it's a little addicting, isn't it? Maybe we have two problems. Maybe we're just kind of used to doing it. We're just in the habit of doing it, but there's also a deeper problem there too. But I think it's just addicting. Maybe it's just the thing you do. So how do we stop? Two things. surface level, and then we'll get after the deeper one. Psalm 141:3 says, "Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the doors of my lips." I think you ask God that. You pray that. God, I need something here. I need a muzzle, Lord. I need you to help me stop. And I think God likes those prayers. I think God answers those prayers, but I think he's going to require for you to act. You're going to have to do some things as a result of that prayer. I knew a girl in high school who put a little rubber band around her wrist, and every time she'd gossip, she'd snap herself to remind herself, hey, we're going to quit this, to get out of the habit. Maybe you're going to have to tell somebody who will help keep you accountable on this. There's freedom in telling people these things. Hey, I'm struggling with this. Would you pray for me? Would you ask me about this? Maybe you're going to have to tell that one friend that that's like your only relationship with them, is that this is what you guys do. And you're going to have to, at the very least, severely reduce or really cut that off altogether if you see it as this serious. Unless you just want to keep licking the brush, go ahead. Take it that serious. Don't answer that phone call. Don't answer that text. Keep yourself away from it. You need to be respectful. You don't need to be a jerk about it, but you need to take this as serious as possible. Don't pray this prayer and then do nothing. Pray this prayer and ask God what you can do to get this guard in place. But I will say that even that is temporary, because look at what Jesus says in Matthew 15:18. But the words you speak come from the heart. That's what defiles you. Ooh. So bad news. You don't just have a mouth problem. You have a heart problem. The source is the real problem. We can put a guard here, but really, if this stays wrong, it's going to eventually break the dam and it's going to eventually come out. So really the thing that needs fixed is your heart. So listen, Christian, I believe that Jesus didn't die on the cross for you to change you on like a superficial level. Jesus didn't die on the cross for you to kind of try to sort of change in your life. Jesus died on the cross to transform you from the inside out. And I believe, and this is really important for you to know, that Jesus died for every bit of this. So even if you're really bad at this, and maybe you're sitting here going, oh my gosh, this is me. I gossip all the time. And maybe you're feeling a little bit grossed out even right now, like, oh, I am like radioactive. I want you to know that Jesus died for every word you've spoken in your entire life. I mean, think about that. He's died for every single one. He paid for every single one. And that fact, Christian, if you can lean into that, if you can really, really feel that, understand that, man, he died for all that, and you can absorb that into your soul and understand forgiveness at that level, that once you really get that that's supposed to be the thing that starts to draw you out of it. You can't believe that he would do that. You can't believe that he would forgive you for that. So you don't want to do it anymore. And you ask him to start changing you from the inside out. That you would love people so well in your life that it doesn't even make sense for you to want to tear them down when they're not around. That you would see people as humans, that you would see the image of God on every single person, that you would see them as a child of the Almighty. That you would never want to talk about them because God's present in the room and you're talking about his children. Let him change you from the inside out. Imagine with me a group of people who really got this. Because the only place this happens is in community, right? You've got family, you've got friends, you've got a workplace, and you've got a church. So imagine a church that really got this. Imagine a church that really took gossip seriously and stopped doing that crap. If we have a problem with somebody, we talk to them, not about them. What if we only told good gossip about each other? What if we only spoke words of life about each other? What if we were fierce and even helped each other in this? That we wouldn't give audience to it, that we wouldn't feed into it, that we would kill this radioactivity all the way around. And then we had this group of people who had, when we spoke, we gave life. If our words were life-giving all the way around. Can you imagine when people walked in here, they'd be blown away by that? They'd be like, man, this is the only place where it's not radioactive. This is the only place that's not toxic. People who aren't Christians would want to come here just to experience some fresh air every once in a while. Man, I want that. I want that. That would be a church that honors God their mouths. Pray with me. God, I pray for the person who's sitting here right now who really struggles with this, is feeling maybe bad about themselves right now, Lord. Maybe feeling icky, feeling radioactive a little bit. I pray that you would help them know and really feel that you love them, that you died for every word that came out of their mouth in their entire life, that that's how fierce your love is. And that kind of love is not something to be overlooked or brushed past, Lord, that we should stop and pause and stare at that for a minute and let it affect our hearts. Lord, I pray for that person. I pray that they would let you change them from the inside out. Lord, I pray that they would be bold enough to have a conversation with somebody and say, hey, I can't do this anymore. I pray that they'd be bold enough not to answer a text, bold enough to ask for some help from somebody. Lord, I pray for this church. I pray that this would be a haven where people could come and have life be spoken, Lord, that our words would be life-giving, that we would not be a radioactive church, Lord, that we would be able to see that damage that this causes. Help us speak life, Lord. Help us to love people the way you want us to love them, and allow that love to actually affect the words that come out of our mouth. In Jesus' name I pray.